talking about all those V's, right? Velocity, veracity, whatever not, right? So the idea is that as computing and all those has scaled up, does that really create the opportunity for analytics being much more available at the point of decision making, right? We have seen how analytics being available, in an offline way when people are really looking at it, kind of interpreting the numbers, so to say, and then using it in their own practices and decisions. Question is that, can it really be integrated with the systems by which people take calls, right? And then, I think in Bridge I2I, our view towards maturity of analytics as an industry or practice is also probably having the similar kind of parlance, right? We have seen there was a time when every walk was around how to make information available to people, right? So the huge amount of information, what technology, how do we keep the data, how do we make it available to people in the most and better optimized way, in what chart, etc., etc. Then I think last 10-15 years, I won't say it's a recent phenomena, last 10 to 15 years, there was a significant jump in terms of looking at insights out of the data, looking at how patterns can be viewed from the data, how that can be used for various decisions, right? And I think and the area has evolved over time. We started with complex models that become even more complex. People talked about machine learning. Today we are talking about deep learning, and I don't know how deep it will become tomorrow, right? So the idea is not it's not about the complexity of the model. The question is, how does that become part of our decision making on a day-to-day basis? And that's what we believe is what we call as impact, right? So if you have to make an impact to a business, you have to really have all of those available at the point of decision making. Now, general thought was that point of decision making is nothing else but when you actually get some few nice looking charts which shows that how the numbers will become, or maybe a nice statistical model, and you kind of validate and say, yeah, it's worked, right? It works. But can it really be available at the point of decision making to a broader group of people? Can probably we include a lot more number of people in the process of analytics, which we typically call as business managers, who can probably at least consume analytics, if not generate analytics of their own, right? So that's really the change which we are observing probably in analytics as well. And I'll probably talk about few examples, which are more new age examples. I know, there are a lot of examples which, people talk, keep talking about, the Netflixes and others. I try to choose few others which I felt may not be so well known, right? Like for an example, let's talk about McDonald's. My kid really loves McDonald's. I don't know why, but he loves it, right? So McDonald's has, is probably serving around 7 to 8 million number of customers daily basis. And they have probably 35,000 number of stores worldwide, or worldwide, and maybe even more, right? So we're talking about maybe 1% of the population being served by McDonald's. 35,000 plus number of stores. Now all of these 35,000 number of stores need to be really thinking about how to make the layout work, what sort of menus they should keep, what type of people are coming into them, how much should be the staffing level. Now, how do you really do analytics in that level in a scalable way, right? You can always say, okay, every store has an analytics guy, or every region has an analytics guy who provides some set of insights and then comes out and people take decisions, right? They took a completely different view. They basically created a kind of central team. That central team looked at two type of data. One is the POS data, the transactions which is happening, what people are buying. The second type of data, what they call as condition data, which is about stores. What they basically did is they looked at, they actually used some of the technologies like video analysis. They looked at, how audiences are, how people are coming inside the store, the weather around, the staffing level at that point of time, the type of product mix they're using, all of those information, and they're pulling it together. And they have a group of data scientists who actually built models, which is simulation and optimization model, which is mainly focused towards optimizing the supply chain, the level of the product mix, as well as the type of stuffing which they need to do, right? And how did they make it accessible to people? They actually made it accessible to those stores the people who are operators as well as the owners of those stores, and what they're doing is basically, they're going into the corporate intranet. They have a portal where they can actually see their own performance. At the same time, they have ways in which they can do a lot of simulations, right? And the simulations can help them to decide what should be the staffing level. How do they really change their menu, or do they really need a different type of menu, right? So what's happening here is basically you are making lot more number of people actually involved in the decision process, right? And it is driven in a concentrated way. It is available to people. It is available at the point where decision is being made. It's not actually that the decision is being made by the corporate guys and sending a direction saying this is what should be your product mix, right? Why? Because adoption is much higher in that way, right? So that's an interesting example. Another example, probably, talking about Adidas. I don't need to probably say what is Adidas, but what they try to do is they try to kind of look at connecting the offline and online world. They said, I'm spending so much of money in probably doing mobile advertising, right? So how much is that really impacting my offline sales, because most of the people are going to the store and buying it, right? Now you can look at it, and from my HP days, I know that it's a holy grail of question, that the digital offline world, connecting the two. What they did is completely different. They basically worked with Google. They actually looked at all of this search. They added location extensions into it, and what they did is they tried to directly direct those people into certain the store locator page where people can actually go and look at, and how many people are coming from there. They obviously know, if X number of people come to the store, how much they spend, how many of them are spending. So they can connect the whole world and say, if I'm spending X amount of money, this is the amount of revenue I'm finally getting, right? So they solved the problem, but not by not saying that, my data is limited, my systems are limited. They actually looked at a technology by which they could solve the problem, right? Similar examples, Google recently are talking about, how they can use sensor information on roads to understand whether there is an uneven surface. And I think Bangalore certainly needs it. Potholes and all of those. They are actually looking at it, and they're defining and designing spaces which are so-called not so rider friendly, right? And that way they will be actually sending this information back to a central space, which will actually help you to decide what's the right path to take, right? These are all analytics. I mean, in my mind, probably Google is the best analytics company in the world, but these are all analytics happening at the point when decisions are being made, right? And that's, in my mind, is really what the world is driving towards. The decisions being made by the people who should be taking the decision, but it's being actually aided through technology and through algorithms, through models by people, right? And then, I think in my whatever my little experience in the last 14-15 years, I've seen several such projects which worked very well, several such which tanked completely, and brilliant projects, but it tanked. And I see few examples or few reasons of why it did not succeed, right? One being, for an example, unclear objectives. Like, for an example, everybody started saying that I need to look at social media and look at how what are people saying in social media, right? And you probably try and look at, I don't know, some atta, and try and see what people are saying about that atta in social media in India, and you realize that 80% to 90% of the sale for that atta is coming from rural places who do not even bother to go and write something in social media, right? So it's a waste of money and waste of energy for you. But for all practical purpose, I think starting from the end and deciding what analytics and data is really required is extremely critical. And I have seen big projects fail because people who are supposed to take the decision were not involved in the process. And because when you don't do that, you have not thought through the technology which is required. Look at the problem for McDonald's. For them to solve the problem, they needed technology. And that technology, if it is not thought through and you actually think, after time, you are completely missed the bus, right? Second is waiting for perfect data. I have not seen anywhere, wherever I have worked with, I worked with GE, I worked with HP. Currently, as a company, I am working with a lot of different companies. I have not seen a world where data is perfect, right? It will never be perfect. and waiting for data being perfect is never going to take you anywhere, right? So I've seen actually people waiting, trying and making the data perfect, and you realize another new business process comes, data again becomes corrupted, and again you kind of start going through the same process. So it's important that you start making baby steps. The core part of the data has to be there, and then build on top of that. Third being execute, not execute, doing the whole project in one go. We'll do a huge big launch after 1 year or 5 years, and something will happen, right? Again, a big problem. You actually, when you implement, you realize there are changes happening. Look at the companies where analytics was used for last 10, 15, 20 years. They are actually evolving in terms of the problem they are solving today, right? So if you actually try to solve all the problems in one go, you will never be able to reach, and because you are always evolving, right? And that is a very important question, and that is probably one of the problem of productization, that if the organizations are evolving, the data is evolving, the type of systems which they are using are evolving, how will really be successful? Because you kind of start with the problems that you know everything, input, output, process, and you build a product, right? So maybe from my experience, next page. Yeah, I'll probably go straight. So from my experience, I'll talk about the project we did, my previous job, right? So we did a lifetime value analysis for a lot of digital customers, and they were buying different kind of consumer electronics type of products, right? And in my mind, I think we used a really sophisticated technique, all sorts of Bayesian models which were simulating and trying to identify what this individual can do. Will they stay back with us? If they stay back, how long will they stay? What will they buy? And all sorts of very interesting stuff. And in my mind, in a very short, small place, we did extremely well. And that particular project was probably one of the biggest innovations we did at that time in my team. But then we realized there are problems in that. Number one, we did not involve the people around on saying that how that lifetime value model will actually be used, right? Will it be used for taking decisions and making them bucketed for better servicing, right, for few of the people? Or will your system of communicating with those people change? Will you give better or different type of promotions to them? So different people, right? These are all, some marketing guys are there, some operations guys are there. We never connected them, right? So and they said, okay, I don't know, I have not thought about this. Great model, but what will I do with it? The second problem is we used our traditional methods at that time, right? So SAS, R, it was hugely computationally intensive. For every individual, it is actually doing a lot of simulations and trying to look at numbers. And we realized that to scale it up for around 7 to 8 million number of customers means for every run with that particular technology, I have to actually run for 15 days. Right? And every time when there is a transaction happening, you need to change it. So for all practical purpose, throughout the year, you are actually keeping on changing your model, right? So that doesn't work, right? So we realize that it cannot be really placed into the into the decision making process. So what we could have done differently, we could have actually thought about the technology which is required to deal with this, right? If the model cannot, or the technology cannot deal with that model, there are better models to use, right? Maybe the efficiency goes down, but at least it's being available for decision making, right? So, and I think these are few of the mistakes we made, because we have not really thought through that who are the people who are going to be using it, how will it be actually used in a more scalable way, right? So that's a big learning. I think that certainly helped us. Now, what we really come and say that if you look at today's world, so yeah. The example which I gave was it was a digital computer kind of.
So let's say iPhone 4 versus iPhone 6. When iPhone 6 gets launched, you have a tendency to shift product. Let's say a competitor product from Samsung is coming out, then you shift. Not like a banking product where you don't know the launch.
So we looked at many of the things. Interestingly, I think in a small setup, the model was pretty good. Looked at many of the aspects. But because it looked at many of those aspects, it could not scale up. Right? That was the challenge there. Right? We could have actually done something small, simple, little less sophisticated, but could have actually worked. Right? So that's what I was trying to drive on that one. Thank you. So I think if you look at the two worlds, right, there is a group of people who believes that services is the way to go. Because customization is important, you put smart people into it and get this done, right? And there is another group of people who believes that make a product, make multiples of money, or at least sell it to another investor and then go out, right? So I think both the worlds exist, and the question is that, and both of them are trying to actually meet the same demand, right? Maybe a little different, but the same type of demand, because everybody knows analytics is big today, right? But if you look at it, let's look at probably the world of products, and I think all of us understand, what are the classes of products, right? Obviously, you allow the customer to get a feel about it before they actually spend money, right? So they they get to know what they will be getting, and that's a huge factor, when you go to a customer. Second, I think there's a scalability around it. Look at some of the examples I gave. Without a technology, without a product, you cannot scale it up, right? So you can probably, if there are 50 people sitting down and building each of the models for that example of McDonald's, that doesn't work for the business, because if they keep on increasing number of analysts for every different product, that doesn't make sense, right? Similarly, we have seen examples where, like for an example, financial services, right? Nowadays, every small change in the product is being defined another product. Now you look at, I work with companies where we have 50, 60 different products, and they have cross-sell engine where they have, I don't know how many number of models, X number of models, X number of products into Y number of channels, each one of them has a model. Then on top of that, there is a conversion model, there is a response model, it's completely messed, right? Several number of models. You come up with another new product, another new model, right? And then you figure out how do you optimize all of these models together, right? Because they might not be actually sitting in the same level. Now the question is that can technology, can algorithm really solve this problem? Because this is not scalable, and that is what, unfortunately, what our customers are looking for as of today. That look at something which is scalable. Look at something which, if I keep on increasing my business on certain side, it doesn't mean that I keep on adding people, right? On the other side, there is a problem with products also. Like for an example, as I said, the world is changing for the same company, right? So the new data is coming, new type of problem they're handling. Maybe they change some aspects of the data. Now, how do you really make the same product work? In the same industry, two companies who are competing companies might actually need little different things. Their business processes might be different, right? So you take the analytics product, and somebody says, no, it doesn't work because I have a different way in which my data is captured. I have a different way in which I make decisions. I have a completely different org structure, and the decision making is far different, and I can't make my organization structure different to make it aligned with your product, right? So that's the big challenge. So let's take an example of Google Web. How many of you heard about Google Web? Right, few of you, right? And it was a great product. The product actually came saying that it can become so-called the collaboration engine, which where all the people can come together, they can share stuffs, right? So it will become probably next generation of email, and that's the platform on which everybody will work. But it didn't work out. It didn't pick up even after that being a great product, because number one, it was not customized to people's need. It was not the space in which it was supposed to be used was not defined well. They said that it can become a email platform. It was not as great as email. They said that it will become like what Google Docs today. It didn't have all the features which are as good as Google Docs, right? So what happens, you can have a greatest of the product with great technology behind it, but it might not work, right? So that's a big issue, because you are going to spend a huge amount of money building it and then realize that it's not going to work, right? Look at the other side, world of services. This is the idea is that you look at different company, you can use it Any problem, some smart guys can actually figure out the problem. New data, somebody can figure out, not an issue at all, right? But what is the problem? Scalability is an issue. They don't really know what they are going to get, right? Look at today's world. I think 10 to 15 years back when we started with G exactly knew what they want. They exactly knew these are the type of models, these are the type of analytics I wanted. I just need smart people who can actually create a center of excellence, who can support me on this. Obviously, we did incremental innovation, no doubt about that, right? But it was known to them that what they wanted. Today, a lot more number of companies are actually coming and trying to use analytics who don't know what they want, right? So they would like to get a feel about what they're buying, right? They might not actually go and say, I will actually create a 70-member analytics team with you, and you figure out how you can support me, right? That's the challenge which we are facing on this side of the world. Right, I think just to summarize, I think what we are really talking about is probably just making it much more on demand, making it available at the point of decision making, making it much more personalized. A lot of decisions can be personalized, and probably having a sustainability in the process, so that it doesn't become like one-off exercise which is not used henceforth. And what we are really talking about probably is trying to kind of create a hybrid between the two, right? So we understand one side it's very difficult to run because you cannot customize. The other side is not scalable, right? So it really needs a little hybrid solution, at least in analytics world. I'm not really generalizing it and saying that everywhere in every situation you need the same approach, right? Certainly products works in most of the places. Now, for an example, how do you really make that work, right? Make that productization work. I think it's a question of, do you really have components which are reusable and components which are more algorithmic, which can be used in multiple different situations, right? And that can be in different areas. Like for an example, it can be the architecture, like how you keep the core of the data, what type of algorithm runs on top of that, how do you scale it up, how computation happens. That becomes the core engine, right? And we do understand that every customer might need different type of ways of interacting with the product, right? And that can really be probably different, right? So we have to really think about, for every different scenario, is there a possibility of finding out a core of that particular situation, right? So which doesn't change, which typically has so-called an input and an output, right? That's critical in kind of deciding. And in my experience, not all the areas it's possible. In only a few areas you have to choose and figure out whether it's really something where you can build something which is sustainable, right? And then, like what you probably make, and that's it's my personal view, because that's how we had been driving ourselves. My personal view is to make something which is 70 to 80% ready, and go for the customization on top of that. And I know that every product is customized, so I want to differentiate between what I say about customization. Any product, even Salesforce implementation is customized, right? But what I'm talking about is probably customization of the business layer, right? The business rules, the way individuals will interact with it, that really changes, right? And I'll give examples and I'll show why I believe so, right? But what is it? It basically means that you can actually use it as an accelerator and say that you are not going to be putting 10 people who will be waiting, and you have to wait for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, where some initial POCs will be done, then we'll decide whether we can scale it up or not, right? So you have the core components, you are 70 to 80% there. You can show customers that something interesting can be delivered in a more scalable way, and then you build a layer on top of that, which is basically a contextual engine, which helps you to kind of help the customers to use the thing, right? So that's basically what had been our thought. I'll give you one example, from our side, that what we are working on, and try to kind of go deep into that. Like for an example, we have identified this whole area of forecasting and planning as an area where we felt that there are a lot of commonality, and there are a lot of there is a core behind it, and I'll define the core. And what happened is that we created the engine which has a core, but then we actually could use it in 4 or 5 different areas. Like for an example, we used it for commodity price forecasting, for technology it's extremely, the price changes significantly. It's kind of, you need to hedge your situation, saying that, after 6 months, if some of the so-called plastics prices changes significantly, your memory and other prices will go up, right? And you will not be able to make your forward contracts with many of the other, buyers. So, that's a very different area as compared to something like fraud loss forecasting. When you look at fraud loss forecasting, it's a low frequency but high severity situation, right? So extreme type of forecast, right? But again, you need a forecasting situation there. We have a demand forecasting, like, there is a hierarchy of products. You have to predict at every level, right? So, like for an example, at the SKU level, then the category level, then product line, business unit level, and different people are taking decisions at different level. So you actually need probably a workflow which allows people to take decisions at various levels, right? And then last, sales pipeline forecasting, little different again. You know how the sales pipeline really grows up over time, and you can use that to forecast. What I'm trying to drive is that the same thing which I'm using, and I'll obviously all of them has forecasting word. That's not what I mean, but there is a core component which is actually being used in all of those 4 areas. And maybe, if I go to the next page, this is how we really thought, and I'll tell you what is core there, right? Like for an example, there is a layer which is required to process the data, right? And you might have some APIs, some web services through which you can bring the data, right? Which can be leverageable, but it might be different. Every company might be different. There is a core data model, which is time series, right? There are understanding of, how forecasting should happen, how reports should be kept, right? How accuracy should be calculated. All of those are very core, and you can really build a data model which can allow that, right? Second is the algorithm layer. There are 3-4 parts of the algorithm. All of those forecasting models, in today's world, there's so many forecasting models, starting from simple, kind of univariate models to, even going into Bayesian VAR models, or, setter models. Different situations, different models work, but all of these models has to be kind of available. Then there has to be a meta system on top of that, which allows people to say that depending on the business situation, what model should really be picked up, right? And the third is basically deciding on what model works for, so basically an automated system which actually looks at all the relevant models and looks at all the other parameters and decides what's the best model in that scenario, right? Or maybe an ensembling of all of those, right? And then last but not the least, allow people to do some scenario analysis. Now that part of starting from probably the core data model to the algorithms, it's core. It will be used in different situations. But there is something like an UI or business rules which will be very different for different companies. Our sales forecast might need a completely different type of front end. It has to be aligned directly with maybe something like salesforce.com. The data which is coming there has to have probably an API which is driving, kind of drawing data directly from your pipeline systems, right? That will be very different as compared to something like a demand forecasting engine which is taking data from maybe your SAP engines, right? And showing it a completely different way. So that's what I'm trying to drive, that you have to kind of decide, and what happens is that core engine is available and made. That's probably 70 to 80% of what you need, and then rest 30% is when you actually generate. And what happens, you start working with 2-3 companies, you actually become far better on each of these areas. There will be a lot more leverageable components for each one of them. And these are few of the areas where we're working on. Planning, forecasting, product recommendations. I think today the world product recommendation is a big thing. Showing something at the point of sales, cross-sell engines, customer experience. How to get all the data, the unstructured, structured data, and how do you use that to understand a pervasive experience for an individual. We also work on an area called model governance, which is basically governance system on top of all the financial models which you're using. I'll not go detail into that, but probably just show the video. Yeah, I'll just show you another product which we are working on, just a small 2 minutes video, and probably just again try to kind of connect it on what I'm basically saying again there in terms of scalability. It's a 2 minutes video just. Yeah, it's okay, it's working. It's okay. So I'll stop here. I think it's showed as an example. It's basically for CPG companies where the salespeople are actually on their mobile. They're having a recommendation on while having an interaction with the stores on what those companies or what those stores should be looking for, what they should be buying, and what they're not buying today. Right now, leave the context. I think what I'm again trying to drive there. If you have to make that work, right, there are two things which are very important. Number one, I'll have to have an engine where you saw the concept of lookup stores, which stores are similar. So it's conceptually what it's doing is actually it is looking at every store, it is looking at all the different stores which are very similar to that store in terms of their purchase behavior and trying to understand where all the similar stores what they're buying and trying to use that for recommendation. Now think about from a computation standpoint for that calculation. You are really talking about a huge amount of computation happening, right? So you need obviously maybe a something like a distributed computing engine. In this case, we use Spark. So you need an engine which actually calculates that, so that you are not waiting for maybe a month for actually generating the recommendation, right? Second, what is also important is that actually making these recommendations available at the point of decision making, which is nothing else but at the point when the salesperson is actually meeting in the store, right? So you send them in a mail saying that these 3 products are interesting, they will never look at it. But if it is on their handheld where actually they are taking the orders and they can actually click and say what are the recommended orders for this particular company, it's very easy for them to actually use it. Even if you actually make two different applications and you say that you switch between the 2 apps, right, that will be very difficult in terms of adoption challenge. So what I'm basically saying is that you have to actually make a product which might not be going the last mile. You will have to align with how customers are using their their own operating system, and it's very important to kind of connect with that. And another big problem which we kind of encountered is on the point of sale for all of these retail shops, how do you actually put recommendation at that place, right? So how do you use their past data to kind of recommend at that point of time? So question is that you can always send a communication back to those individuals saying that you might be interested to buy, but at that point when the person is actually coming and talking to you, you need to probably use that opportunity to provide that, right? So look at all of these type of analytical problem which I am talking about. It has really some core components which are common, right? Second is it has a technology component which is mainly used for algorithm as well as scale up requirements, right? And third is it has customization ability which allows the last mile customization, both in terms of data coming in as well as data the output feeding into whatever business systems they are using, right? Easier said than done. We have seen that it's a tough one. it's not an easy one, because there's a lot more effort which actually goes at the last mile of configuration, right? So again, I'm not trying to kind of diminish the complexity of making this work, but probably based on our experience, this is what the path we might have to take as an industry in India as well. That we don't really stop at just purely services and say, okay, I build a model, you figure out what to do, right? I think customers are looking for more solutions which are more pervasive, which is more scalable, can be connected with their systems. And if you don't do that, somebody else will do, no doubt, right? I mean, it has to be done because that's required for the business, right? So maybe I'll this is an overall view and say that I think first one I talked about is the solution really have core components that can be customized. If the core component is absolutely not customized, the models are so rigid and so fixed that it can only be used in one situation. You build that one particular model, one particular product, and figure out whether that has a market size or not. Don't try to kind of build something like this. Second is it future ready? I mean, that's a very, very important point, right? Sitting today, there are a lot of changes happening even today. There was a point when Hadoop was like the in thing. Today, people are saying Hadoop is point of last few years. Now people are talking about Spark. So I'm just saying that things will keep on evolving, right? So is it really ready for managing the future requirement? Third is the solution, will it change the current process and organization for the organization? If it changes the organization, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell, whatever great company we are, right? And can the solution be integrated at the point of decision making? I think that is the key. Wherever the decision is being made, make the person feel that they are taking the decision, and not the decision is kind of coming in an Excel file and say you figure out how to implement it, right? If that happens, somehow the utilization of the product becomes higher. And in my experience, a lot of very interesting products which I got to use, and as an analyst, we dumped it because we felt that it's not giving any choices to me. It's like I'm becoming a dumb person, and maybe we felt that do I if it is there, is there any requirement of me as an individual, right? So I think it's very important to understand that is it really integrated to the decision making, so that people are taking decision based on that, and not that somebody else is taking the decision. Last is it really affordable as a solution? I think that's a very important point, right? So when you actually try and make this, it can blow up, and it can blow up so way that you figure out, okay, to make it so-called the core component, you have so many different type of models, so many different type of situations, that the common part itself becomes like out of hand, right? And I think that's try to kind of use and juggle between many of them is what probably is required. But I strongly believe that we just can't be a pure services company. I think that time is gone. So anyway, I'll take questions. Yeah. I think scalability comes in 2-3 different ways. One is the technology used, the type of model used, the type of algorithm used, and how the computation is done. Like for example, the sales recommendation engine concept, that if I used a very traditional way of calculation, I couldn't have scale data, right? So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that it's a one-off system, and it does not integrate with how people actually do their business on a day-to-day basis, right? If that doesn't happen, it doesn't scale up. It only becomes like a great project for one particular individual who has paid for that project, right? And it becomes like maybe a marketing organization of Asia, they use it and it doesn't get used others, because it's not actually integrated to the process. I think that those are the two things which I was trying to.
So what I was asking is more from there are different technologies already available, right? So is it you choosing the right technology for the right platform, or it is what you have experienced as a startup is more from a funding perspective or getting those things done?
No, I think it is. I think it's a choice of technology for the problem. I think it's a choice of technology for connecting with the business process and the systems. sometimes you might have to actually choose the technology in such a way that wherever that decision making happens, like for an example, from a sales kind of scenario, you might actually want to build the whole thing in maybe salesforce.com, right? And that allows you to kind of scale it up along with the platform, right? So, it can be both in my mind. I don't know, I mean, I think any other examples from any of you, what you have seen in your life, I would love to kind of hear about that. That this is obviously my perspective on, how I have seen the world, but any other thoughts, questions, I think it would be interesting for me to also hear what you have seen challenges, or in your world, any area where you felt probably productization can really drive significantly. I would love to hear that also.
So you were talking about the algorithm there. So where you build, put in some different kind of models. So what do you think? I mean, like which one is more beneficial? I mean, like say letting the user at the end to decide, pick up the models, or it should be a smart, intelligent engine which can actually pick up the right models based on the data and the business requirement.
I think all depends on who is taking who is using it, right? If you actually if you actually give something to an analyst, and whatever be the use case of it is actually an analyst using it and taking a decision, and ask that person that, it will be an intelligently, somebody else will take the call, you will have adoption challenges. You will show that, and you will also show how they can make some changes, at least some what ifs, how they can run and kind of decide. But if it is something where the final person who is using it is not analytic savvy, then you will actually make it more kind of automated and recommended by the system, not by the individual. I think, like for an example, the fraud forecasting example which I gave, the output of that goes to a fraud management group who are pretty analytical in nature, right? So we actually gave the front end, which is more where, you have the numbers, you have what is recommended by us, by the system, but they have an ability to kind of simulate, they have an ability to kind of see if they change the model, what happens, right? If they change some of the aspect, what happens. So they can actually, they get a feel that, I'm actually doing something and taking the call. However, some of the points, like for an example, pipeline forecasting, it's all directly coming, it's being actually driven by the system, and the forecasts are directly coming into the web page. So there's nobody they can change it, they can edit it, but there is no analytics which they can run, because they don't know how to run analytics. So it depends on the examples.
Thank you.
One of the challenges which typically when we are creating a product in the process is that the role of the user roles is ranging from the user roles is ranging from right from the CXOs to probably the line managers who are operating that. And to bridge this gap based on what are the different what ifs, or what are the different dashboards which each of them want to see, it seems to be quite the breadth of the product is increasing enormously.
Right.
So what would you recommend? Would you go in for different set of products for each of the level of the users, or probably include a multitude of models in the product and call it whenever that particular user is using? Which would be a better approach?
I'll take the question in two different ways, right? So first question is, like for an example, in the same product, there can be two different roles seeing it in two different ways. Take the sales recommendation engine situation, right? The sales guys just need to see the numbers. In their handheld, it is basically saying these are the three products which is interesting, right? That's the use. They basically say, this is the amount of number of orders which I have placed. But there is a business rule engine behind it, right? The business rule engine is where an analyst or a pseudo analyst is actually changing and saying, okay, if I am running this particular campaign or promotion, maybe send more recommendations towards that, right? That you have to actually allow a complete backend, so-called front end, for an analyst or pseudo analyst to kind of play around, right? So first of all, every product might have different facets, how they're using. Second point, I think I will again bring in the other point that you cannot be 100% correct and full in the first go. So we always try and look at what is the core of the product, right? So like for an example, in this situation, making sure that this whole system works, that recommendation gets created, it comes to the sales guys, I'm actually keeping the data, data comes back and I'm using that for refining my algorithm as well as recommendation. That is my core. The decision which is taken by the sales guy at that point is the core, right? Now I might have to start with, have an offline system of reporting out numbers, not maybe in a front end, very nice looking front end. Maybe I'll be using something like, just giving a name, maybe a click view or a Tableau to just show the numbers, right? At some point of time, if I, when I have time, suppose, I can build it up for them, right? But I think the core of the product will be first implemented. Then all of these cases when we are working with customers, there is a time when, there is a lot of back-end reporting which goes, because as you said, right, everybody wants different type of reports, different type of numbers. So, it's you cannot really, try and make it 100% correct or complete before going. But that's the approach we take. We look at the core part, we implement it, then we try and, slowly get some, maybe your CEO is so important from influence standpoint that his front end becomes the most critical one. That's a different thing. But I'm saying that, you'll have to probably choose what areas you first focus on. But we never go for 100% of it in one go. That will be too long a cycle. So there are two things. I think the question was around, how do we speed up a process? See, there are productivity tools which are used by any services organization today, right? So there, I remember when in 2000 we used to build even a so-called logistic model. Used to take huge, round of paper outputs. We used to kind of note and finalize. It used to take not less than a month for us to build model. And today, people have figured out, how to automate macros, this, that. So that's one thing. And that's more like every services organization need to have some productivity tools to manage, right? I think from algorithm standpoint, you will have to find out whether that algorithm can actually automate the decision which you are taking. And I think for sure, that's my experience, that you will never get the best model as if an analyst sits there and does it for 3 months. I think the question is, do you wait for 3 months in that situation, or 3 weeks, sorry, or do you actually, you are fine with the small error, but you are looking for the speed. So I think it's a situation. Some situation, like for an example, some of the risk modeling situation, you want to be 100% correct. You want to test it, stress test it, you might not use it. But there are some situations where so-called the type 2 error is not so big, right? You want to go for volume, you want to go for speed. It's perfectly fine situation, right? But my experience, whatever be the sophistication of algorithm you use for making a model automated, an individual sitting down on it for 5 minutes with some productivity tools for 3 weeks will build a better model. I mean, that's my experience. I don't know about others.
So one question is that, just extending the same talk, how does a business draw the line between where to stop with people and go into, let's say, products or machines as such, specifically with analytics? Because today what I see across the industry is that there are lots and lots of business analysts, data scientists, decision scientists, all of these people around who, 2, 3 years, 4 years out of college, generally done some sort of engineering, etc. But I do not happen to see a lot of mathematical background. That's something that we see is required to tune your models better, or in fact to select a better model, right? How do I know whether model A versus model B versus model C, or the 30 other kinds of models that can be built, right? If I do not know about all of them, how does the business say that, okay, I'm not going to use a person, but let's say a product which implements something like a Bayesian model selection? So how does a business draw the line between the two?
So first of all, I don't believe that suddenly tomorrow the world will be completely products. I think there is a reason for services and products to co-locate. I'm just saying that the products has to be little more customized, and I think even Bridge I2I will never try to be a product organization completely. I'll actually become an organization which has in some areas core products, and I will put services to actually make it work for the customers, right? Little bit here there. Coming back to your point, I think the mix of people are changing, no doubt about that, right? That's because the volume is increasing and not everybody can handle that volume, right? So the type of type of institutes we are talking about who can actually bring in people with that specific background, we don't have too many such, right? So you obviously need to go for other type of people, but again, I think there are a lot of different type of roles which are also evolving, right? So, and I think the mix will not go back. It is going to be more and more towards that. I think it's a question of, there are two things which will happen. One, there are places where you can actually make it much faster, where technology will be brought in. The new customers who have never done analytics and they want to test out the water, they will always try to look for some possibility of using some sort of technology and products, right? They will be averse to kind of creating a big team to start with, right? So that's what we see that, but again, I don't think the world will become a product organization tomorrow. I don't believe that. Anything else? I think we are on the top of the hour. Thank you for attending it. I hope I could make it useful some way. And anything else, obviously offline we can always talk. Thank you.